Okay, hi boys and girls. Today we're going to be focusing on rounding numbers on a number line.
So before we get into our lesson, we're going to go over some vocabulary words that you're going to hear Miss Holmes and Miss Apfel repeatedly say. And you're going to hear us say boundary numbers quite a bit and maybe some friendly numbers. And friendly numbers are those numbers that we count with, we do mental math with. And then you might hear or see the word benchmark. All three meaning the same things.
Okay, so here for our first example, we have a two-digit number, 36, and we've underlined the 3 in the tens place because we're rounding this number 36 to the nearest 10. So when we're going to round this number to the nearest 10, we want to think of our boundary numbers. What two boundary numbers does 36 come in between on a number line? 36 falls in between our nearest tens of 30 and 40, and those are known as our friendly numbers, our boundary numbers.
So the other vocabulary that you're going to hear us say is midpoint or the halfway point. And it's basically what it's saying. It is between our boundary numbers, which is halfway between our boundaries, or in the middle point. So midpoint, halfway, or in the middle of our two boundaries.
Okay, so here is our example with a three-digit number. We've underlined the 3 in the hundreds place because now we're going to round that number to the nearest 100. So we have to think about which boundary numbers would be our friendly numbers that would help us to determine which number this 356 rounds to. So on the picture here, we have included your boundary numbers at the bottom. Now we know that 356 falls in between 300 and 400. So these are our friendly numbers, our boundary numbers. Up at the top of the hill, Mrs. Holmes went ahead and put our midpoint for us. And because mistakes are okay, neither one of us caught it until now, or right before now. But we went ahead and marked out the 2 and made it a 3 because originally this was 250. And what do we know about that, Mrs. Holmes? That midpoint, was that correct? Was it in the correct place?
Well, seeing as that it was 250, that would mean that 250 was greater than 300, but less than 400. Well, it is less than 400, but was not greater than 300, so the 2 would not make sense to be there. So that's why we went ahead and changed it to a 3. So now looking, 350 is greater than 300, but less than 400. So that's also, guys, another way to help us find the boundary numbers.
Okay, we're using this three-digit number 136. Even though it's a three-digit number, we can still round it to the nearest 10. That's why we underlined the 3 in the tens place. So we're going to use a cover-up strategy to kind of help us do this. If we cover up that hundreds digit, we're looking at the two-digit number 36. We're going to ask ourselves, what two boundary numbers does 36 fall in between on the number line, the friendly numbers that will help us? We know that 36 is greater than 30 but less than 40. So those are our two friendly numbers here on our number line. Now, we're going to keep the 1 in the hundreds place. We're not going to just forget about it in the hundreds place. It's still there. And we're going to mark our midpoint, our halfway point, which is 135 because it's halfway between 130 and 140. And then what do we do, Mrs. Holmes? Do we need to find our number?
Well, now that we found our midpoint, it makes it very easy to see that, well, the 36, if I cover this up, comes right after the 35. So I'm able to locate my point on the number line, and then I can read that when we're on this side of the midpoint, we round to the 10 that goes up. And then if it's on this side of the midpoint, we would round down to the next 10 or the boundary numbers.
Okay, and here we have, just to kind of show you again, we have the 136, the same digit is underlined, and we're showing you our two boundary numbers that 136 falls in between. Here's our midpoint, which we already identified as our halfway number. And then Mrs. Holmes helped us out a lot because she found where 136 falls in between 135 and 140. Because it's on the right-hand side of the midpoint, we say it rounds to this greater number. It does not round down to the smaller number. It rounds up to the 140.
So 136 rounds to 140, or 136 rounds up to 140. So here we have a 3-digit number. We underline the hundreds because we want us to focus on the hundreds. Same thing. We can cover up the 3 and 6 just to know that we're in our hundreds place. And our closest 100 is 100. And then our next closest or friendly number would be our 200. 136 is greater than 100, but less than 200. So I know these two are my boundary numbers. The midpoint between 100 and 200 is 150 because it is in the middle of 100 and 200. Again, now that I found my midpoint, I can know that this 136 is going to be on this side because it is smaller than 150. And then it just kind of falls down the hill, so I know it's going to round down to 100.
Okay, so on this last slide, what we've done is taken the same 3-digit number, but this time we're showing you the number line that you're typically used to seeing probably. We went ahead and wrote those friendly numbers, those boundary numbers, 100 and 200, and we also marked the midpoint, which is exactly halfway between the two friendly numbers, the two boundary numbers. But then what I wanted to show you on the same slide was, it's basically like we're taking that midpoint and we're pulling it up. And when we do that, we create this little hill, which is actually a friendly little hill because it's going to help us to determine whether we round down to the lower number or whether we round up to the greater number. So once we know what the midpoint is, after we've identified our boundary numbers and we know what the midpoint is, that makes our job a whole lot easier because now we just have to figure out where does 136 fall on this hill. And because it falls pretty much over here, somewhere to the left of 150, because it's less than 150, 149 or less to be exact, it rounds down to the 100. What about on this side though? If the number is exactly the same as 150 or greater,
So, Ms. Apfel, just so it's a clear illustration, because we will have students, and some have asked us, what if the number is exactly 150 and they want us to round to the nearest 100? Well, our midpoint is 150, so here it is labeled. It's kind of just sitting there. It wouldn't go backwards or down the hill. So, how do you explain, Ms. Apfel, that we would go forward to the next greatest?
If the midpoint is your actual number that you're trying to round, either down or up, the rule is that if it is exactly the midpoint or greater, then you're going to round up to the next biggest boundary number. That's like a rule that we need to remember. That's probably not going to happen very often, but just in case it does.
So tonight in your INBs, you guys are going to have a number just like we do. Of course, your number will be different because we want you to practice that. And tonight we want you to focus on our tens and our hundreds and rounding it up. So Ms. Holmes is going to draw her number line, and I'm going to underline my tens place because that's where it wants me to round to first. So first I need to cover these up because it makes it easier for me to see my friendlier numbers or my boundary numbers. So I know that my next 10 down would be, is that right, Miss Abdul?
Oh. No, it's not, Mrs. Holmes.
But you said if it goes down, what did I do wrong? What do you mean?
Did you... What'd you do, Mrs. Holmes?
So, boys and girls, this is, we're trying to prevent. This is a common mistake that we sometimes make. So, we are going to cover up our 1 and our 2 because we do want to focus on our tens place. So, the next closest is actually our 30. Even though it says 30, it's still 30. So, our boundary number would be between 30 and 40. And just like Miss Apfel said, when it's exactly the number, which wouldn't happen very often, little did she know that I was going to have her do this, that it's going to be right here. So in this case, it's going to be closer to our 30 than our 40. So it would stay at 30.
So you mean to say that we didn't really have to work very hard to think of our boundary numbers because isn't that our boundary number right there?
It is our boundary number. So I know we covered this up, Miss Atfield, but I know that we need to keep it because we're only concerned about our tens place. So I'm going to write our 1,000, our 2, and now we know it's closer to that 30. I'm going to go ahead and write 30. Do you think we'll be that lucky on our hundreds?
I'm not sure about that.
So this time I'm going to circle my hundreds. So I know this is my focus. So what do you think our friendly numbers or our boundary numbers will be, Miss Atfield?
Okay, well, wouldn't it be helpful to cover up that thousands digit to see it a little better, a little easier? Okay, so if our number now showing is 230, I would think that the two boundary numbers would be 200 and 300 because 230 falls in between those two hundreds.
And we know it's easier to locate when we find our midpoint. So our midpoint, halfway between 200 and 300, is exactly 250. So I know I'm trying to locate 230. So 230 would be somewhere over here, which means if we pull this line up, it's going to go this way. So 230 would round down. So I know we're keeping that 1,000 because that doesn't change.
Right.
But now it's closer to our 200 than our 3.
Yes.
So I'm going to finish it off by writing 200. So tonight in your interactive notebooks, we want you guys to really focus on our tens and our hundreds, but using your number. So you get your number line out and you can draw it and glue it into your next available paper and then keep up with your
Table of contents.